Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Podcast. I am back with my friend, my mate, Mr. Rohan Jivan. How are you, good sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Although hay fever is killing me today, to be honest. I don't know if you get hay fever.
Oh my! Is that going around in the UK right now?
Yeah, it's some people get it like really hard at the beginning of April. I tend to get it around now, but it tends to like fizzle away as I get towards the peak summer months of like July and August. But right now I'm suffering. But yeah.
No, I hear you, mate. I hear you. It's one of those things, like, I feel like now, at least for us in Canada, it's freaking cold, but like things are starting to like break. Yeah. So allergy season. So whether it's like, I don't know, not even just hay fever, but like, I don't know, like pollen and things like that. And like, if anybody gets any like ragweed or like one of those, like, I don't know, even like grass, whatever, just everything spikes. And I just feel like people are in this weird bit where they're getting sick and like the weather's getting good. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I feel bad for you.
Yeah, it's the worst. When you're sick and the weather's good, it's like, oh, it's the worst combat.
Oh man, it is the worst. It is the worst. But what wasn't the worst was our transition after the first half from Liverpool. What a game. It could have gone very different ways, mate. Like I use this a lot, this meme, but genuinely the Gattuso meme really sprang to mind because I was ready to tear into the team after the first half. And then second half, I'm sat there saying, should I be proud? Like, that was a very good performance. And so it was just one of those things where I think that there were bits that we did really, really well, bits that we did very, very poor. And then we're going to try to discuss a little bit about how you're feeling. But broadly, mate, like in the game, where was your head at? So everything had, like, as a fan, everything we're trying to post-mortem. But at the end of the day, we're facing a team that we all had hoped to overcome. And we're at this point where there's actually nothing to fight for. Yeah. But like, where was your mentality as a fan? Yeah. Maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because I think if you look at the general discourse around how Arsenal fans are feeling going into these last few games, I mean, I know obviously mathematically there's still a possibility prior to the game against Liverpool, and even now, and that we might miss out on Champions League football. But let's be honest, we're going to get Champions League football, right? So these next set of games... Yeah. It depends on which way you look at it. There's nothing on the line, really. And that's where I think sometimes people think, I don't really care and, it is what it is. But for me, I'm very much of the opinion that we've got pride to play for, at the very least, and I believe that if you can't win it, you have to be the best of the rest, or try and be the best of the rest statistically so that the optics don't look bad on you come the end of the season, because we know what narratives are like. We know what stories are going to be painted afterwards if Arsenal do fall off and we don't finish second. So for me, it was very important that we take these games seriously. And it's kind of the same thing about, cup competitions, the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. And it's very interesting because some Arsenal fans and some fans in general look at certain cups as us being above them. I never have that mindset. We're not above any competition whatsoever. We should be going with that mindset of winning, and a winning mentality is what breeds, I think, sustainability in terms of you being able to go on runs of good results. So I wanted us to take it seriously, and especially being against Liverpool as well, as you alluded to, the champions now. And I kind of wanted us to go into the game thinking like, okay, you've won it, but we're still here. And we're going to be here next season. And I think, like you alluded to, there's a tale of two halves, which we'll get into. But yeah, that's where I stand.
Yeah, it's really strange because I tried to get myself... Look, on this podcast, we try to find out the why quite a bit. We're no strangers to criticizing aspects of the team, the manager, and the players. But, when I'm trying to understand what it feels like to approach something that you failed in, like I'm trying to think, okay, let's try to get an analogy. You've got to get into a program in university, right? And you're in high school, and you've got to the point in which, there's a certain grade point average in order to enter the program. Yes. And you have just received your final grades in which you haven't met the cutoff. But there is still a cumulative assignment that's due at the end. You've got Or rather, maybe the other way around. You've got your cumulative assignments in which, you've passed certain classes, but other ones you've failed. So ultimately, your grade point doesn't matter, but you got to write a final exam. Yeah. What do you do? What do you do in terms of trying to still get into a program you're not going to do? How do you get yourself up? Do you just tank and say, well, whatever I do doesn't matter at this point? Or is it about the principle? And, I'm with you, mate. Like, in life, we practice our best to be our best. I don't believe that you can turn on excellence.
Yeah.
Right? I think that excellence is a pattern of behavior, a pattern of successful habits. That to me is what I think of success. And I think the reason that I wanted to really highlight this at the beginning is because I did want to ask you, as a whole, so we know what the cup competitions may lead to earlier in the season, but there is an undoubted fact that in April and May, every year since Arteta has been in charge, the team has taken a fall off. There has been context to each season, and there has been a clear preference and priority placed in certain competitions. But it is very clear that April and May, this team falls off for rhyme or for reason. And kind of wanted to ask you, is there a reason that you attribute this to? Is it cause for being concerned, particularly when you start comparing it to, Liverpool and Manchester City on average? And I'm trying to not draw a pattern, but it's beginning to be worrying for me, I have to be honest, because I look at the total amount of points that have been accumulated in that same time, and Arsenal are second. Something like 4 or 5 points as a difference to Manchester City. And so that would mean as a total point accumulation, we're fine.
Yeah.
But the one difference in the data as far as a spread, there's a clear difference towards Arsenal's performance in April and May as compared to Liverpool and Manchester City. And when you're talking about the difference between 4 to 5 points and the amount of titles, because, Liverpool have actually accumulated less points than Arsenal and got a league title in this same period. In the last 5 years. City, of course, have got 2 titles over Arsenal in this same period. And so I'm sat there and, I'm trying to balance this where I would be like, well, it makes sense because, in a couple of those years, we suffered really major injuries, which forced us to play, poor players in the 11. Manchester City and, Liverpool haven't had that. And so then I'm saying to myself, okay, the logical side is saying, I hear you, mate. I hear you. No problem. Yeah, that makes sense. However, if we're now going into a period in which that has happened almost 4 to 5 years now, despite recruitment going much, much higher, is that an Arsenal issue? Is that an Arteta issue? Is that a player issue? And I'm not ready to remove anything off the table at the end of the day when it's a 5-year sample of that happening. But I don't know if I'm ready to completely blame one person. Where do you sit on maybe this problem that I'm giving you, where from a point tally perspective, factually, Arsenal in the last couple years have been good enough to win titles in the past? Because when I have a look at us in comparison to other title challengers, so you're looking at your Manchester Cities and your Liverpools, right? And we're looking at the total points that have been accumulated over the last 3 to 4 years. Arsenal have something like only 5 points less than Manchester City. And of course, in those last 2 years, 2 to 3 years rather, Manchester City have 2 titles. Now, in comparison to Liverpool, Arsenal factually have more points than Liverpool in that same period. And yet, of course, they have this year's league title. And in that same period, so that means that it's not a point accumulation issue. Just factually and objectively, the amount of points Arsenal have accumulated in the past has resulted in titles. So I don't want to ignore that fact. But at the same token, right, in April and in May, Arsenal, in comparison to their compatriots in Liverpool and Manchester City, have a statistical drop-off that is quite clear over that time. Now, there are very valid context reasons. There are times in which we've had to prioritize competitions pretty much each season. We've had to make that choice. And the context has been, well, there's been certain seasons in which we've seen injuries. There's been certain seasons in which we understand that, we have fell out of a cup competition early. And so we've prioritized other ways. But I think there's been a consistent period, mate, in that April and May. And the reason for that drop-off is because despite us maybe putting our eggs into a basket, there is a period of 3 to 4 games in which Arsenal consistently drop a big cluster of points in April and May. And so I want to be fair, and I guess my long-winded question is basically trying to ask you, where do you stand on how much of this is luck, coincidence, and pattern? Because there are two things that can be true. Arsenal have been phenomenal to the point of being able to win trophies because of their points totals. However, they factually have consistently fallen off every season, despite there being context as to why.
It's interesting because I think, like ironically, last season, you go post-January, Arsenal went 16-1-1, didn't they? And they lost that game against Villa, which can happen. It's an isolated game. And the Manchester City result was a strong one, in my opinion, and I'll stand by that. And that's incredible form. That's a team that's operating at a 100-point pace. The point that you made there about, the clusters of results is something that isn't just exclusive to injuries. This is something that has been a pattern in Mikel's tenure. Go all the way back to when we weren't competing to when we have been competing. We always have a period in which when we lose a game or draw a game, it's followed by another draw or a loss, and then another draw or loss. And then we go on a run, and then something else happens again. And we've seen it this season as well. And I think it comes down to... Mikel spoke about this before ball was kicked this season. He said it to the Men in Blazers podcast, where he wants Arsenal to become a team that is totally dominant in any given way. And he specifically mentioned Arsenal on their bad day need to still find a way. When we're not playing well, we still need to be superior to the opposition, even though on the day we aren't superior. And I ask you this, I'll give you my thoughts on it. Since 22-23, how many games have Arsenal scammed? Have not deserved the result, but they've been able to get over the line. I could go back and look at many games Liverpool and Manchester City have been able to do, where you're sitting there, you're scratching your head and you're thinking, how on earth have they won this game? Because they're able to get over the line when they're not at their best. And I think since 22-23, I look at Leeds away, I look at Liverpool away. I know we were 2-0 up, I know there was some moments in the second half as well, but we got absolutely smashed to pieces in that second half in 22-23. And then the following season, I'd say Chelsea away at Stamford Bridge is the only game in which I felt kind of scammed. And this season, there's United away and there's Aston Villa away, in which I don't think we deserve the results that we got in those games. And there's a level of subjectiveness with some of these results, right? But the overarching feeling that I have is that this is a very small sample. And not every day you're going to be able to perform at your maximum, but you still need to find a way. And this team has showed an inability to do that consistently, alongside the adversity of whether it's relinquishing a lead or going a goal down. There isn't that feeling in which we can come back into the game. And that's for me why the Liverpool results that we've just seen, I was very positive about, because this is a game in which we fell down 2 goals, but we were able to get back into it and got a result. But that's not something we do consistently. And I think it's a number of different things. I think at times it can be squad rotation when healthy. I think that is something that Mikel needs to improve on. I don't think you can look at that this season because of the injuries that we sustained, but also individuality and the quality that we do need to address for sure in the market. But yeah, it is something that has been a concern.
And I think if I was to tell you that Arsenal are statistically one of the best finishers in the league, what would be your response?
Crazy, isn't it? It's mental, isn't it? But then it's kind of like, do we create enough situations, enough shots? And this is where we can go into a much larger discussion, isn't it? So.
Which is where I want to lead you, because fundamentally, I think this is the biggest issue, personally. I think because when you start talking about scamming results, right? Where do your eyes as a fan go to? It's the individual moment that won a game. It's the Mo Salah, boom, top corner. It's the Bukayo Saka, top corner, boom. But I'd love for us just to go a little bit further, mate, because Bukayo Saka or even Mohamed Salah, the reason he gets an opportunity to go boom is because he's missed 4 or 5 before that. Now, if Saka has missed 1 and we're asking for a boom, that's not good. If Martinelli has only had 1 opportunity And we remember that miss, because we do, and we'll get onto a Martinelli. But then we expect him to go boom the very next time. I think that it is a fundamental difference between the very best sides in terms of our shot totals in our forwards. It is a significant drop-off that I think is hard to ignore. And when I look at Liverpool and I look at an ability to scam, one thing is getting more shots. That's an offensive thing, and we will talk about that. But another thing which I really want to relate to this game, and specifically, is the first 35 minutes, there was a period in which the entire back six backed off. And they didn't engage. There was a really poor midfield performance between both Merino and Thomas Partey, I felt, in terms of being able to control the center of the pitch. Thomas Partey, for me, far too often was going into individual battles, was running into and being drawn into an individual battle when we needed somebody to keep the shape and hold. And I don't think that Mikel Merino, and we will give individual sections to him a little bit later, but as a whole, he struggled with releasing the ball, understanding the time that he had in midfield. It's a completely different, you almost see a different Merino in midfield than you do as a striker. Completely different. Yeah. There's one who dillies on the ball, whereas somebody at striker, I don't know if it focused him to be quicker with his actions, but it wasn't the same. Like, I want to be fair. The Merino I saw against Liverpool in midfield was not the Merino that I saw in his time as a striker sample. There was actually a lot more quick thinking and actions then. But I've said this a lot of times before. I feel that Merino struggles with the game in front of him and him having to meet it. He has an issue in terms of being able to complete and speed his thought, because I don't even know, mate, if it's necessarily a technical issue. He's clearly a technical player, but he loses his technique in certain situations. He loses his technique in his head a little bit in certain situations with pressure. And it's been too consistent for it to be not a pattern at this point. And so when I'm starting to understand what happened in those first 35 minutes, you had some midfield dysfunction, but probably the worst part of it was the back line for me. And I don't know what you felt. Even on rewatch, I sat there thinking, why is this back line not going high? Why are they backtracking every time Liverpool have a transition, despite being outnumbered in midfield? I know us to meet the 1v1. We kept backing off it and going back and back and back, and it allowed Liverpool to gain territory. And that's honestly the last thing that you need Liverpool to do, because they don't need to be asked to obtain momentum. And so really, it led to this very loose touch, very loose build-up, sure, so we couldn't get a foothold in the game. But I was just shocked at the out-of-possession territory that we sacrificed so consistently. And so there's two parts of this, and I only bring up the out of possession because I really think you're going to talk in possession, some of the big issues that Mikel had. But I was looking there and I'm just thinking to myself, out of possession, there are some issues here that we did sort of get braver in. And I really don't know how else to say it. But after what I think was a major bollocking in the dressing room, people stopped doing it. Like, there was bravery. There was bravery to meet, including Saliba, Kivior, Ben White, who I think throughout the game improved as the game went on. Yeah. But even Miles, who for me was just probably the most consistent player, again, that we've had, being able to complete his duels. But that was a big problem for me in those first 35 minutes. It was the backing off from engaging in your duel. What did you think as far as those first 35, 40 minutes, despite, by the way, I might say, playing so poorly but missing a diabolical chance in terms of, I think people are harsh on the Saka chance earlier on, but the Trossard Partey mix up after a high turnover there is unacceptable.
I mean, this is where the numbers can be very misleading, right? That is not even generated any substantial XG in that moment, because I don't know what they are doing there. It's, for me, I looked at that and thought, that is pathetic. There are three players there. There is one Liverpool defender there in Curtis Jones. And there's the goalkeeper. And you do not test the goalkeeper. That epitomizes Arsenal in terms of the good and the ugly. The good there, the timing of the press there was fantastic. Thomas Partey wraps his leg around. One of the few times that he did in the first 35 minutes, who, for me, had a really poor first 45 minutes alongside Merino. But then what follows is stale, and we've said it so many times. And, we'll definitely be talking about it more in the summer for sure and in future pods. But there is something there in terms of a lack of individuality there, but also just it's this thing where we play with our food too much, George, and statistically it shows as well. We're looking to fashion the most perfect opportunity where you look at other teams, when they win the ball back, they're brave. They're willing to get shots off. They're going to do it because they know they're going to win the ball back again anyway. So they keep doing it on and on and on. But going back to the first 35 minutes for me, the backline thing was very frustrating. But for me, the biggest frustration, and I think this is what Mikel was alluding to post-match, is the number of giveaways in the middle of the park was horrific. It was shocking. It was from Merino. It was from Partey. It was from Trossard. And what Mikel prides himself on is it doesn't matter who the opposition is, he will consistently implement a game plan that mitigates the powers of the opposition, irrespective of who we play. He talks about it against every single opposition. I remember, I was looking at the Crystal Palace post-match press conference that he did in December, the 5-1 victory. And he was talking about how what Palace were doing in terms of the press and the increased intensity that they provided in that game relative to the cup game that happened midweek against Palace. So we had to tinker something. He always prides himself on mitigating the threats of the opposition whilst maintaining the principles of play that he believes in. It's that balance that he always looks to achieve. Now, what are Liverpool fantastic at and better than pretty much every team in the world at? In open spaces, when they win the ball back, they are able to get into your box just like that, and they're able to get a shot off. You giving the ball away in those areas cheaply, consistently, is playing into the hands of what Liverpool wants to do, and it's the best way that they consistently create chances under Slot, under Klopp. That is what they do at their best, and the fact that we kept doing that, I think, really triggered him, because actually, there was still a lot of good moments in the first half in terms of what we were doing on the ball. We'll talk about there were certain things that we were exploiting with Salah's positioning that I felt was very interesting. Not interesting, but in the sense that he always does it in terms of staying high. And we had a lot of things that were working really well, tactically, structurally, but we weren't able to implement it because we kept giving the ball away. It doesn't matter what your structure is, what your principles are. If you keep giving the ball away in those areas against that type of opposition, you're going to be under threat. And David Raya made some crucial saves to keep us in it in a difficult moment. But yeah, and I think after that, it was a reaction and it was being braver, as you alluded to. And because we weren't giving the ball away cheaply, we were starting to time our jumps more, as you were mentioning in terms of our backline being braver. And then you saw in the second half what we're capable of. We battered them in the second half. Go and watch it back. We absolutely battered them. And I don't want to hear this idea that Liverpool weren't trying. They were absolutely trying. Obviously, when Merino got sent off, the game altered and it became a different game because of the reality of the situation. But the frustrating thing for me was that I was looking at it in that first half and I was seeing the ideas on the rewatch and thinking, this makes a lot of sense. I like what Mikel's doing here. But we keep giving the ball away. And yeah, that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, but I've always felt like in our worst moments, one of the biggest game model issues I've had is passing tempo, not necessarily us not being able to find people. And I think, just to quote, one of our favorite people to quote EPL Analytics, he had, presented a central progression percentage in which we were something like 1.5%, after game week 11. And now, in terms of looking at that, we are now at 4.5%. So it backs up a lot of the numbers that we have said over the last couple of months, that we felt solutions to the central progression have dramatically improved. So it's not a matter of, for me, not knowing solutions. However, we get lulled into periods where I just feel like when things go against us, we retreat, whether that's in terms of duels. And by the way, we've seen that historically with Mikel Arteta teams, and it comes from a bravery. It's not coming from him because, back in 2 years, remember the 2021-2022 period in which there was a time where the back line kept retreating. And we sat there and, people were saying, oh, Mikel, it's Mikel's fault. And I'm like, no, this is a guy that wants one of the highest defensive lines in the world. Yeah. He's not telling them to retreat. He wants them to meet, but the players aren't confident in terms of what the tactics are being told. And I find not only are there still remnants of that when you're not confident, you tend to retreat into your line. Why? Because there's safety. I can sympathize. I know from a coaching perspective and a player, if I'm not confident, and you're feeling the Anfield atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, it could be Newcastle, it could be Anfield. You know where there's safety? Safety in numbers. When I retreat, I get into my block, the spaces become small, my job becomes easier. As soon as I step out, my job becomes harder. And that results both out of possession and in possession. So when we're talking about some of the passing tempo issues and some of those things, far too often, I don't think we have enough players that can gas pedal and decide when a game needs to be sped up, when a game needs to be relaxed, and brave enough to receive in those high frenetic times and be confident that, hey, give it to me and I will slow this tempo down and then I will speed it up, though, when the opposition are slow. That's really key to me, like this ability to go fast and slow, that playing, almost playing with the clutch. Anybody who has driven manual knows that if you are on a hill, right, it's not a matter of just pressing the gas every now and then. There's a little bit of play that you got to do in order to engage that clutch. And that's the same thing when you're talking about a game, trying to get a game uphill. When you're trying to get a game into a faster tempo, it's not just press the gas. That's not the right way. There are some times that you got to play with the clutch a bit. You got to play with your opposition to find the right moment to release the gas. And that is the exact same principle that I feel that Arsenal lack a little bit too much, which I do think that Zubimendi solves hugely. I think that is probably the biggest pro for all my concerns that I have about him out of possession. I think that's one of the big pillars that we're addressing with that signing in terms of passing tempo, understanding that. And so that'll be interesting. And I move into like the second half in general because the tempo changed. I think that we were far more improved. There's a much better intent. And mate, I want to talk about a player that me and Alex have fought probably all year to different degrees about, Gabriel Martinelli, who I think is linked to the Martin Odegaard discussion quite a bit. I'm going to frame this for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts right now. If you're going to tell me the answer to Gabriel Martinelli and the position requirements there, we have to be rigid, George. I cannot have you imagine a role that is different for Gabriel Martinelli. And by the way, for that area of the pitch, it must be the same. If you're telling me logically that's your position, I find it ridiculous from not just a coaching perspective, but mate, tactically, if I know that one side of the pitch is going to function in this specific way, you don't think every other opposition manager is going to go and pick that out? That is going to be something very, very consistent that is going to happen. So when people tell me the whole Gabriel Martinelli thing, yeah, we know that he's good in central areas, but that's not the way Mikel plays. And I go, I hear you. But if we're sitting there and we're saying that that is the only way to play and to use Gabriel Martinelli, I find it difficult to get on that boat. And what we saw with him going central is not something that I feel we haven't seen across his career. And to me, you saw Gabriel Martinelli that wasn't just positive, but in terms of his runs, mate, there were 3 or 4 runs, bending runs that we just refused to play the ball into. And, there's some viral clips that are going around there. And I do believe it is related to a type of striker and focal point that you have up top. And this team is not used to running forwards. They are used to very predictable outlets. And predictable by I mean is the wingers must be high and wide receiving up until that point. And then the chance and the unpredictability part actually happens when we're settled. And the unpredictability is more along the lines of I'm going to cut back at the wide part of the box. That's it. We don't give an opportunity to maybe release the pass. And that's a problem with Arsenal, especially if you're going to start talking about ways to break down mid-blocks. If you're going to start to talk about ways to break down some of our worst positions. So in this Martinelli discussion, I would love to know, clearly there are environment versus individual impacts. But where do you stand on what was admittedly a very good performance? The goal was phenomenal. Very difficult skill to dig out a header in that position. But wasn't even just that. Where do you stand on the movement that type of striker creates for the midfield and the questions it asks from the opposition?
I mean, I I love this performance largely because of how we used him, because we've not used him like that since 22-23, in terms of that level of directness. I remember the game against Nottingham Forest in 22-23. Don't know if you remember it, but it was a 5-0 win, and Martinelli scores a header. So he starts wide, Jesus drifts over, we recycle it to the right-hand side, and then Gabriel Martinelli makes the ghosting run, which is what he was doing consistently. Not a case of he's starting centre-forward and he's making that run, because when you're starting centre-forward, you've got a centre-back behind you. But when you're able to start nominally left and then come inside, it becomes so much harder to mark. And he scored a fantastic header there. We've seen in the early Unai Emery days as well, when he was playing up top, and some of the goals that he was scoring, some of the instinctive finishing that he was showing there. And I think this game is very interesting, but also frustrating, because the way I really want to focus on this tactically is because Liverpool always keep Salah high. That is a non-negotiable for the way they play. We look at our wingers differently. I understand what we do with our wingers personally. I get it. But I understand what Liverpool do with Salah. And it gives him so much threat, so many opportunities. The amount of times they just lump the ball in that area every single time because Salah's going to get there. And by the way, Miles, fantastic performance in terms of the ability to deal with that consistently. He was my man of the match. But what happens there is Liverpool setting up with their back four, their two in midfield, Szoboszlai pressing higher, Diaz looking to cut off the pass into Saliba by pressing onto David Raya, and then you've got Gakpo and Salah. So you've got your numbers there. It's a numbers game. So we push Miles inside. Against back four teams, we usually tend to do that because it allows you to really overload the middle of the park. So Salah has a dilemma here. He either jumps towards Cavill or does he stay towards Miles? Either way, we've got a free man here. If we're comfortable and we're confident, we can play. This is what frustrated me. We had the structure and the organisation to really play through Liverpool, and we saw that predominantly in the second half, but the idea was there in the first half as well. And what was happening, and I know we're going to talk a bit more about individuals like Merino, who, I do struggle with in midfield personally, but one of the things he does really well is his willingness to drift wide and to receive and to open up the gap. And that creates a dilemma for Gravenberch. So Gravenberch starts to pull wider. And what happens here is Trossard drops deep. That makes so much sense. What I loved about this is that Mikel, from an in-possession point of view, that left-hand side, he got the balance perfectly. Trossard, Merino coming a little bit deep. Merino pulling wide, Trossard coming deeper because that's where he's better at, as opposed to making runs in behind. And Martinelli, then the trigger was, every single time Trossard came in, Konate would follow, and then he'd make the run. He'd make the run in behind Bradley because Van Dijk can't meet him because Van Dijk is pinned by Ødegaard when Jones has to press higher onto Thomas Partey if Szoboszlai is not able to get there. And that space was opened up there every single time. Now, what we tend to do is Declan Rice makes that run. It's not the left winger who makes it, it's Declan Rice. If it's Kai Havertz playing in left centre mid, it's Kai Havertz who makes that run. It's the same idea, it's just who you're asking to make that run. And it made so much more sense with the players that we had at our disposal in this game for Gabriel Martinelli to make that run. And I understand it when Declan Rice is playing left centre mid in certain games, making that run because of the power that he possesses. But I want Martinelli to be the guy who can make that run more than my left centre mid in Declan Rice against specific opposition. And that's what the trigger was. We exploited what Liverpool had with Salah staying higher and the overload that we could generate there with Merino pulling wide. If Gravenberch stays, Merino's the free man. We can find him there. But Gravenberch is pulling wider. Then Martinelli can make that run every single time. And he was fantastic in that regard. And I loved how dynamic and how fluid it was. He was fantastic. And I think what he's able to do in those sort of areas, drifting inside into the box, I've always wanted Martinelli to be able to be given that freedom because he is not a traditional like winger. This is the point I made to Alex, George. I know you're going to come in there, but this is the point I made to him is like, if we're going to use Martinelli as a traditional touch-like winger, 1v1, you're not going to get the best out of him because it's not the type of player he is. Head down, always looking to go to the byline. How many times have we seen Martinelli cut inside and shoot and score towards the far post, winger-esque type goals? He doesn't because he doesn't have that. He has the cross, but he doesn't have the shot. So then we have to create the environment for him. And I don't think we've consistently done that. That's not to say that he shouldn't share responsibility in some of the performances that he has showed over the past 2 years. But I always maintain that I don't think we've done enough to to extract more out of this player.
I've got a couple like frustrations, mate, because look, if I asked Big Gabriel, to be the main distributor of Arsenal, he's going to look poor. Okay? And it's not to say that he's a poor defender, but you know, mate, like when you're talking there and you're even talking about Declan, I'd love to ask you, even against low blocks, are you telling me that you would prefer Declan to be one of the ones testing the back line in those positions and making those runs, or Gabriel Martinelli? Who is better up in the box? And it's about priorities for me, right? Like when you're starting to build pods, this is why I love talking about relationships, okay? If we are going to build relationships and you're talking to me about you want a Declan there, that means to me that you're missing some of the shuttle runs from deep. You're having trouble getting the ball from deep to the final third. Now, once we're there, the problem is if you keep having the midfielder be the one that's making the last run, it means from the top of the box, they're testing the back line in a low block. That is not something that Declan can do. But if you're forced and you're rigid, and you make the midfielder constantly be the only one that is making that last line run, then yeah, mate, you're going to get into that issue. But for me, I've just never understood why not we recruit somebody who can be a touchline option, that if the game calls for it, you switch. And one of my frustrations is look at Calafiori, by the way, on the Saka chance against PSG in terms of his delivery from wide spaces. It is there. And then when you ask me, what about Miles and his ability to play in midfield and offer an overlap? It's there. So when I look at successful pods, if you want Declan, because the game is struggling to get out. We're struggling to get out from our deep third, and we need a little bit more running power. Only in that scenario, I would enjoy a Declan in midfield. But what does that need? It needs a left back that is able to do a lot of the defending duels. So you're looking at a Miles. You're not looking at a Zinchenko. You're not looking at anybody else other than a Jarell Hato. That type of profile needs to be behind Declan to give him the space to do those shuttle runs. And you need a left winger who is fine having one or two touches, not just recycle, but the unpredictability to cut inside and outside. That's not Gabriel Martinelli. So why do we judge him on that role? Then buy somebody. By the way, I'm just going to throw a name. He doesn't even need to be a buy. Reece Nelson is the best at that role on the left in terms of being an isolated winger with what we have right now. Now, for me, we need to start pairing pods, mate. And we've needed to do this for quite a while. So when you look at what Gabriel Martinelli can do in this role, mate, that pod needs to be Calafiori and Miles on the left-hand side to support Martinelli to be the one that's inside. That's how we have to platform so that we see this performance from Martinelli longer. Then, if you want something different, let's recruit something in which you can use Declan in that role. We already have the left back who's a supreme dueler, but we do need to find another attacker that is more comfortable touchline if that's the way that you want to play. And to me, mate, we need to be a lot more intentional about who we're playing and when. And this eliminates this idea of starting 11, constantly having to play and playing to players' strengths and making sure that we're putting that at the forefront. Because again, I'm going to transition to Martin Odegaard, who had a very good second half. And shock horror, this is another guy that began getting a lot more creative, a lot more willing to release his final ball when he was paired closer to a runner. And sometimes, mate, we complicate a lot of tactics with, we want qualitative superiority and we need to make sure that, X, Y, and Z is positioned in this manner and you can only have a certain amount of people in this zone, when fundamentally, sometimes, if I've got a high touch player, I need to put him next to a low touch. If I've got somebody who's afraid to shoot, pair him with somebody who shoots too much. If I've got somebody who isn't fast, pair him with somebody who's fast so that you can cover the weaknesses and they naturally will go to each other. Because I'm telling you, Martin Odegaard was beginning to find Martinelli with his runs. And what got me excited, to be fair, by the way, and I've always felt this, if Martin Odegaard can release his mental block to not be afraid of trying things, that is a player with the vision and the ability to find people in pockets. And I actually did see a little bit of a sneak. Say we were to get a moving center forward and Zubimendi coming in, and there's been a big question, can Martin Odegaard be the 10? Let me answer this very specifically. He will never be a 10. That will be a Florian Wirtz, an Emile Smith-Rowe. If you want somebody to be the carrier, that won't be him. But one thing I do believe, by the way, he fully is capable of really impacting zone 14 with his final ball. And we saw moments right now, as long as he's near a running midfielder and he's not asked to go and be a middle third dictator, if he can just focus on finding the run, that is your role, Martin. Don't worry about other things. There is potential there, especially if he releases his handbrake, because technically there's no issue with me in terms of him being able to spot and find people that way. But I don't see him take that enough. And mate, it comes back down, even the second goal, as far as the shot, he releases the handbrake. And, all these really poor takes from me about, is his ankle protecting his shot power? Did you look at that shot? Did that look like this is a man who doesn't have shot power there? It's just, some of this, actually not some, a lot of this is mental. A lot of this is being able to play with a handbrake off. And I do believe that he has been fully aware of the fact that he's underperformed. I think that this is a guy that is a deep thinker, very self-critical, and I think he's gotten to a place where he was afraid to express himself. I'm just going to say it. And it didn't come from the manager. It came from him being burdened with failing. And he felt it. And he was feeling it. And this was a mental thing for me, that whatever bollocking worked, because for him, it was a case of, I've already played like shit. The manager's gotten into all of us. I might as well try. What can I do now? And he thrived. It was something where I felt like this needs to be thought of a little bit more. I am going to look at Mikel next year to start basically playing people with complementary pairs. And I would love to start talking about that more in attack mate, because we do this all the time as center back pairs, don't we? Everybody talks about a sweeper and a stopper. Why don't we talk about a passer and a runner in the same manner? Why don't we talk about, when we're looking at Declan Rice and some of the things that we've seen in the number 8 position, by the way, the things that we do like, why don't we ask for other things in terms of, we know that he's a good carrier to a point, but this isn't somebody that's a small space player in the final third. But the reason that sometimes it can work is if you've got a wide outlet that is so threatening, cutting inside as well as outside, that gives the space for Declan to carry and to drift and to occupy different heights in different areas of the pitch. And it's a much different role to me. So I will end on this and kind of transition, because there is a role that I think wasn't performed very good. But I wanted to give you last minute thoughts, mate. Like, if we're not going to use a player in the way to advantage his strengths, is that too stubborn on Mikel? Should we be critiquing Mikel? Or should we be just willing to get rid of an asset that we know? Because you know what I'm afraid of, and I'll just flat out say it. We sell Gabriel Martinelli, I have zero doubt, if used correctly, will be one of the best players in the world. I have no doubt, for me, he will be a top 3 performer if you allow him to have an inside forward role, a la Heung-min Son, or if you allow him the freedom to drift centrally and be a running center forward, and you properly platform that. I think Gabriel Martinelli will score goals. He's shown it. He's consistently shown that in many, many months. I'm afraid that we let that go. That's an aspect of Arsenal that we really lack. So we're going to get rid of the only runner in the front line? Doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. But I guess I'll just give you one last moment to kind of wrap that up. Your final thoughts on this whole environment or not, and trying to fit people that maybe haven't had the best role this season.
Yeah, I mean, when we reflect upon the season and we look at areas in which we can improve on, one of the things that I mentioned last season, I'll mention it this season as well, is the usage of certain players. And I look at Declan Rice, and this is where I think Zubimendi will help us massively in terms of first phase. And I actually think I want to write something on it, but I think one of the big improvements that we've made this season is our ability to play through teams against high-pressing sides. We have the staple of our play in terms of going over the top, but I've liked the solutions that we've had in the middle of the park and some of the trigger movements that we've seen there. And then looking at Declan Rice, I don't think Declan Rice is the most comfortable against a high press back to goal in terms of being able to receive, turn, and then face play and play the pass. That's not necessarily his game, this current version of Declan Rice, and that's totally fine. Declan Rice is never going to lose it in that area. He's going to play the wall pass. But what Declan Rice is fantastic at is all the other aspects. when you're talking about a number 6. When you're talking about as a number 8, Declan Rice has mentioned it many times before. He likes to play in that role when spaces open up, where he then can carry and power through when the opportunity arises. Not against a settled block and where he's, like you alluded to, in terms of playing in small spaces. And sometimes we've done that. It's crazy, isn't it? It's like Declan Rice has been fantastic this season, but I'll still maintain I don't think he's been used in the best possible way in many games this season, and I'll stand by that. He's looked still very fantastic, and we're looking at him as one of our top players of the season because he's a phenomenal footballer. But when you ask me the question of have we always maximised Declan Rice, I don't think we have, and it will vary between different games. I'm looking at Ethan Nwaneri. I don't like the idea of using Ethan Nwaneri in the same way we use Bukayo Saka. They're different players. Ethan Nwaneri can give us a lot of quality on the right wing, but if used correctly, and we've seen it at times this season, we've seen it many times what he's capable of when he's able to come inside, shoot, have that trademark finish. So there is an argument there in which we do need to give certain players a better opportunity to flourish. And I think going back to the Martin Odegaard point, I think with Martin Odegaard, we've always mentioned it here. He's a fantastic player, but he's not the guy. But that's okay. That's completely fine. But if you give him the right tools and the right players around him, how funny is it? Well, it's not, how unsurprising is it? Martin Odegaard's best performances come with a Ben White. Ben White and the power that he gives on the outside. Because, one, they've played with each other consistently for a very long time alongside Bukayo Saka. The synergy
and that's
is
the
there.
runner.
And it's the runner as well. Yeah. That's not to say Ben White is a better right back than Jurriën Timber. They thrive in different areas. But this is the point here of where you look at Martin Odegaard and you look at his best performances, they do come with a Ben White, because of what he's able to give in the final third. And that's what it's all about. It's about giving players the right opportunity to thrive. And going back to the goal, if you don't buy a ticket, you don't win the raffle. How many times have you been frustrated where we get into that area and you just shoot? And I hate this idea, like, for example, towards the end, Martin Odegaard had that shot that just went wide. And you always get this idea of, but maybe you should have passed it here. There's like, no, forget about it. Just shoot. Just shoot sometimes. It is what it is. And that's what Liverpool do consistently and why they've been so... For the fan that isn't like invested in the tactical side of things and doesn't care about the basketball nature of Liverpool games under Jurgen Klopp, lesser to an extent under Arne Slot. But what's exciting about them is they keep shooting, they keep trying, and we don't do that enough. And had Martin Odegaard not have had that shot, who knows? We might not have even got a point in this game, Mm-hmm. So this is where I was so happy when I saw that, George. It's like finally just a shot from an area that's low XG, low probability, but you give yourself the opportunity, and of a ricochet or something falling. So yeah, I think, we'll probably talk about it more in future pods, but there is a wider argument in terms of, I maintain Mikel improves players to a very high level in terms of an individual player, their technical quality, what the knowledge that they gain, everything there. But I do think there is an argument that we don't necessarily always platform certain players, and he gets the balance right, despite the fact that he is very well aware. He's talked so well about it in interviews. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, and I just think on this platform point, because this seems to be the theme of the pod, by the way, we have seen enough sample with Mikel Merino that I think we need to begin to have a little bit of a conversation about him. Because I want to make it balanced, mate, right? Because at the end of the day, I really do think that people need to maybe get accustomed to areas of the pitch are seen differently by different players, and it can change in leagues. Because the midfield role, by the way, that Mikel Merino is currently playing, and the difference to which he felt free for me at the striker. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, I think he was a completely different player to the Liverpool game than what he had shown in the last month or 6 weeks at striker. And for example, I wasn't talking about a striker that was delaying on the ball. I wasn't talking about a striker, by the way, who was delaying his actions. I was actually saying, wow, there's actually some natural instinct being made, and there's this quickness of thought. At no point did I feel Mikel Merino was hindering. If anything, he was facilitative to what we were doing. Then it got to a point against Liverpool, and I'm having a look, right? And, I still think that there was I think there's a little bit more rhythm to his play, but the same issues that I felt when he gets pressured with the game in front of him, he loses his head a bit. Like, I don't think it's a technical issue because he's clearly a technical player. Like, I've seen different skills in the middle of the park that I say it's so frustrating because I know technically you're at a different level, but you do lose your head and you lose your decision making. It's almost as though the striker position was able to really solidify his role into something that he understood. And when he understood it, it was quick. The movement, the passing, the way that he's able to release, it was quick. But everything about his performance in midfield was 1 second slow. And I just don't think that that's a fair thing to talk to him about in the striker role. But in midfield, it's absolutely fair. Yeah. So I would love to ask you your ideas on that, and ask a very difficult question that was asked by Certain James in the IR. What's the long-term position of Mikel Merino broadly?
I mean, I think I've been probably the most, maybe out of the three of us, the most vocal about Merino and the concerns that I hold on him. And, to be fair to him, I actually think since the turn of the new year, he's had some very good midfield performances. I thought he played well against Ipswich. Thought he played well against Everton. But I've always had this worry of Merino, and I've tried to not present it on the timeline because I want to give players an opportunity. I want to use the idea of, he's not had the games, he needs continuity, etc. And that's still very valid. He's not had a pre-season, all these things. But I do worry about Merino in midfield, and it really hit me yesterday where I think this midfield needs a lot more work than I initially thought. But it's very difficult as well because we've got already significant departures going there this summer as well. So it's kind of like, how much do you really want to do? But going back to Merino, right? As centre forward, you are marked by centre back, right? You are marked by at least one centre back, always. It doesn't matter what structure it is. That is who you're going to be marked by. And usually we do tend to go a little bit longer with Merino. He's able to win the first contact, etc. But that's not to say that he's not been coming deep, because like I've alluded to, Arsenal have been, for me, the big positive this season is our ability to play through teams, some of the sequences, some of the patterns, and that has came with Merino as a number 9 as well. But what happens is when Merino drops as a number 9, the centre-back doesn't always necessarily want to commit too far in. So he's able to get a little bit more time and space when he does drop, and you don't see those loose touches like you alluded to. But when you're playing as a midfielder, you are marked by a midfielder. Always marked by a midfielder in the middle of the park. You're not going to be able to have the time and space when you're receiving deep. So it's a different role there in terms of you're doing the same thing, you're dropping deep, but who you're being marked by, the pressure that's being applied on you is different. And I think, that I raised it today in the timeline and my concerns and the sending off that he had. David Raya, you remember the Declan Rice, where he sold Declan Rice short against Newcastle, and they got, and Fabian Schär is on Rice like a rash. That's a hospital pass from David Raya there. That's not Declan Rice's fault. That pass is never on. But the pass to Merino there is always on. He's put it on his strong foot. Just play the wall pass to Saliba if you're not confident there. And he loses it, he gets sent off. And that's not down to fatigue. That is something that we've seen with Merino against Manchester United. I saw it against Monaco. I've seen it in other games as well when he's played in midfield, where he becomes looser the deeper he goes. And I think that comes back to your point about being pressured. But also there's more jeopardy when you lose the ball deeper. Whereas when you play higher, he's a lot more secure. He does
and
a
I
lot
really
of
want to
good
be
things.
specific because mate, like I have this thing, like I genuinely think it's a body shape issue. Like he weirdly coming to the ball understands to use his momentum to shift. Yeah. Whereas if the game is in front of him, and he's got to progress from that point, he doesn't have a good enough understanding of his surroundings, which is so counterintuitive because ironically you have more space in the ladder. Whereas the alternate, you have less space and you need to be quicker, but he seems to understand that much more.
Yeah.
So,
and you're just going back to, it's really interesting this, because it's like, he's clearly a very smart footballer. Very smart footballer. I can never display that. There's certain players you just look like you're not very smart. You can tell, right? Merino's a very smart footballer, and that's what. It's like some players you're just a Dumbo. Like you're a Dumbo, but Merino is a smart guy. You can tell it, and I like some of the things he does higher up. But when he comes deeper, I don't know about you, but when that moment happened, the pass to him is there for Raya to play. But when he plays that pass, I'm thinking, oh no. And then it happens there, and he's done it a few times. But when I look at Mikel Merino, and let's look at the positives and the negatives of it in midfield, right? As Mikel alludes to, when box situations require greater volume, greater density, Mikel Merino is a fantastic target, whether it's at centre forward as a midfielder. If you're going to give him that role, he's fantastic there. I like the things that he does higher up in terms of pulling wide. The reason why Gabriel Martinelli was able to make that run was not just because of Trossard dropping and the trigger of Konate following and then running behind, but it's also Mikel Merino drifting wide to pin Bradley, to pin Gravenberch at times to allow that space. He's very smart there. But I just feel the out of possession concerns for me are there when the spaces open up. I'll put it frank, he looks like he tows a caravan when the distance is lengthened. When it's tight, he's fantastic. He's really strong in the air. He's strong in the duel as well when the distances are close because he's able to wrap his leg around it, and he does that fantastically. But when it lengthens, the game lengthens, it does become a bit more worry. And this is where I do worry about the summer, about where this midfield's going, because I'm looking at it and thinking, without Declan Rice, this team lacks a lot of energy. A lot of legs. You've got Miles there, obviously, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. Don't know if I'm very comfortable, George, to be honest. So yeah, but we've got a lot of other work to do.
What's that Tom Skrinner thing where he
I don't get nervous. Honestly, George, I was getting a bit nervous yesterday thinking about it. I was like, yeah, we can get by. My concerns with Marine have always been there. It was like, yeah, we can get by. But I'm looking at it a bit more and thinking, oh, Zubamendi is not a big space player. Declan Rice is the only one alongside of Miles who can run. You know,
but that's been my point for months. You know, I'm looking at that and I'm getting nervous. I'm getting nervous at that construction, and I've been nervous. It's why I'm thinking, do we need another? And you know, people don't want to talk about it. You know, and by the way, the whole Miles in midfield point, that's also contingent on getting a left back. Like, it needs another signing to even consider Miles.
Exactly, because Kivior and Zinchenko. Well, Kivior, who knows? But Zinchenko's going, Tierney's going. You know, this is
Nuno Tavares is gone as well. Yep. Like you've lost three. Like, okay, let's assume Calafiori and Miles continue the left back cover. By the way, let's just assume that. You can't put Miles into the midfield conversation when he's almost a starting left back. Yeah. You can't do that. And so it becomes, mate, both positions need buys. Like, you know, and we're running into this thing where, mate, between right center back cover, can we have 60 games with William Saliba? I don't know. I'm looking at the left back situation, and if you want Miles to be more in midfield, you need to supplement that. And even still, we're losing 3 left backs, regardless of how you want to slice it. So can we really go 3 left backs without a single buy? I don't know about that. Then the number 6-8 position, exactly like what you said, I have always felt we need a cover for a Declan Rice. In the same way that if we needed cover for a Zubamendi or somebody who's a deep-lying playmaker, at least I look at Martin Odegaard and being able to have somebody who's a middle third control. Like, I see a redundancy plan there, and there's something to cover that in case of an injury. But I'm starting to look at the legs in midfield.
That's the worry. The legs.
The legs in midfield are looking a little sparse, and I'm thinking to myself, hold on, are we going to do this Groundhog Day where this year everyone was like, we have too much legs, to go to no legs? Like, we need to find this balance, right? And it can't be such an extreme either end of the pitch. But, you know, we're approaching that point in time when people would say that we waffle. So I have to jump over to the the question bank.
Yeah, a little bit shaky, George.
What a transition. I will pick something from the old X, and in the meantime, have a look at your Discord. But I do have a lot of questions. Thank you guys so much for your questions on X. And of course, if you guys do want your questions answered, you can, of course, have priority in our little Discord chat. So make sure you become a member on Patreon. You can do that in the link down below in the description, or you can just sign up for a 7-day free trial. Check us out. We'd love for you to stay, but you can check out the platform and all the stuff that we do have. But yes, so in the meantime, from X, I've got a large amount of questions. However, I have one major question that I probably want to throw to you. Okay, so there's a lot of transfer questions, but thoughts on Merino and Kai Havertz being bought to play the left 8 position, but their best performances coming at 9. Is this a Mikel profiling issue? And I'm going to just expand that. Or is this a role issue?
This is very interesting. I think Mikel Merino and Havertz are slightly different there, where I actually think Kai Havertz in left... The thing with Kai Havertz is he does have the legs to one of the things that we've actually praised Kai for, in the early days when he came was not the in-position stuff, but the out-of-position stuff that he was doing so well. Actually, now I've just thought of Kai Havertz, it's given me a little bit more of a calmness, to be honest, with the legs. A little bit. But yeah, I do find it very interesting where, I can't put my finger on it as well, really, because when I'm looking at it, when we look at the role of the left centre mid, we look at the role of the striker, left centre mid naturally does become more of that second striker, making those runs into the box. And those two types of players are very much of that type, isn't it? In terms of the threat they pose in the box, the density, etc. So, but yeah, I do want to be a little bit more critical though of Mikel's purchases now in midfield, because I'm looking at Mikel Merino, and as we've mentioned, his best performances have came up top. I'm getting concerned about him in midfield. Now, I think the comments will look at us being harsh here, but if we sit back right, our concerns on Mikel Merino are in the role that we expected him to be playing in. That you don't need to be. It's not rocket science, isn't it? That's a worry. And then Kai Havertz as well. I personally always felt Kai Havertz was a number 9, not a midfielder. Although I like the idea of him in certain games playing there, like Aston Villa 23-24. I thought the idea made a lot of sense. Those runs in behind. But yeah, there is a wider discussion here in terms of who we go for and how we kind of invest in the middle of the park. So I know I've not really answered it, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I look at the biggest thing is I'd say the profiling question is I'm going to just substitute the word platforming skills. I would like Mikel, which I do believe he's had issues with in the past as far as making sure that we've got complements. Like when you talk about the Kai Havertz in midfield, he's really a striker. And we've got the number 9 that's a false 9 coming in to do those roles. Like the technical roles when you've got Jesus dropping in or Trossard dropping in, like the pairing of having a Kai Havertz who operates in midfield but really stretches is on the contingent that your number 9 is the one that's dropping in to do some of the technical skills to give him the space. He's going to drop and you're going to have some space coordinated there. So from my perspective, that just has to do with, again, complementing the skills, understanding that Kai Havertz has a brilliant ability to lead the press, but also stretch lines. He has the legs to do that. But in order to, supplement kind of some of the midfield things that we do need somebody that's a lot more technical, able to drop and
100%.
Receive under pressure and do those. So it's just about platforming players in the right way. And I do think we have some ways to go to be perfect at that. That's probably the one thing that I'd say is fair. Do you have anything from your little Discord?
I do, my man. So from Dinny, I like this question. No, Alex as well to be Mr. Defender Fs and Defender Pundits. Love you, Alex. Do you think the rhetoric or narrative from media, the likes of Sky, impact public opinion towards the club? Is there where, you have opinions that are presented on huge platforms witnessed by millions? Does that have an adverse effect in terms of Yeah.
Mate, not to like blow it off because I've had my chance in the sun at this. I'd love your opinion on it because
Yeah.
I have definitely had that argument with Alex quite a bit, and if anything, I felt that this season has actually proved my thesis surrounding it. You know, I have a look in the cold light of day about reflection, and I believe that the media is powerful. I don't believe personally that the media has no effect on the play, and I actually do believe that, you know, as far as external factors go, we always quote the stadium as a potential external factor. We always quote the mindset of a player going in, you know, this whole idea of, do they have a baby? Do they do this? So the idea that the media, who is a major component, and I'm sorry, mate, it's you guys, respectfully, the UK media, you have a long storied history of impacting player performance. Why is it so ridiculous to believe that one of your best players ever, and David Beckham, was abused to the point of potential depression, and we don't assume the media has a role to play on players broadly, when, respectfully, it's been really the reason for your international failures for so long? And that to me is just logical sense. I mean, in any sport, the media plays a role. Now, how much you're able to shut that out is depending on your mental fortitude, the type of player that you are. But also, mate, here, I'm going to do something really personal. I'm not going to sit there and ignore that I am somebody who can take criticism. We're out here and doing a public podcast, okay? And there are days I argue a lot on Twitter, and, you know, I ignore some of the advice that you guys say, but I must be vulnerable to a certain extent and say, listen, there are days that it gets a lot. You receive a lot of credit, and I receive 1% of the type of abuse and exposure that these players do, and it gets to me. Somebody who is very secure in his life, somebody who's very secure in his opinions, and is very secure in his outlook in general. But there are days when even my Twitter exposure is too much. In what
100%.
world would that not apply to a professional footballer? Forget the fans and the Twitter of it all. When professionals that you undoubtedly looked up to as a kid are sitting there running narratives that, you know, if they were in the locker room, they would not run. They're doing it to pander as entertainment, and you know it. And there's a part of me that just must become very bitter. And then they want to be chummy when things are going well, and they want to interview you, and they want to portray the overlap as some relatable podcast. Why? Because, by the way, they are very intimidated by this exact form of media and fans taking over that space. So they're trying to go and become relatable. The whole CBS angle of the Thierry, the Michael Richards, and the Jamie Carragher. Look how relatable, and we are like you. So come and tune into our show, because you will find personalities like us. But at the same token, I'm going to criticize, and I'm going to criticize you, the players. Please be my friend. You know, Leao, mate, I call you and I text you all the time, but I'm going to criticize you on national TV in front of millions of people. And there's got to be a level of frustration, a level of judgment, and a level of anxiety that carries. How much that impacts your game depends on your mental fortitude. But mate, I'm not buying this idea that it is completely external, and it does not lead to really dangerous issues in how a team may respond to adversity, how referees may respond to certain situations, and how clubs may respond to certain situations.
No, you've mentioned it. You said it beautifully there in terms of the players, and then you mentioned it about the referees as well. And I mentioned this to Alex before in terms of, like, I can't quantify this, right? But it's a feeling that I have. When a club is assessed, analysed to a certain level, and they are consistently giving out opinions around certain things, like, for example, time wasting. I remember when there was a lot of attraction on David Raya supposedly time wasting, even though statistically he wasn't doing it to the level of any other Premier League goalkeeper this season. It was not abnormal. It was fine. But you keep talking about it, that subjectively can influence the referee in terms of they know about that. So every time they see it, they will look at it a lot more relative to another team. That's just natural because you're exposed to that information. These referees don't they don't put their heads in sand and they don't look at these things. They absolutely do. They watch games, they listen to analysis, they see all this stuff, and when they're exposed to that, that can influence some of their decision making. So that immediately tells me, of course, it does impact. And then it's the same with players as well, and some of the opinions and some of the way that players are castigated. It's not good, and it can really have a bad impact on their performances. And obviously, there is the other side of it. They have to have the mentality, etc. But I don't know, man. It doesn't feel right for me. And I think the refereeing one was very interesting because, like, we saw what happened with the delaying of the restarts, and how the decisions that went against us there relative to other teams. There was a lot more focus on Arsenal there. And then you see these things happen. I can't quantify it, but that feeling and what I'm seeing there suggests to me that it is something, that it certainly does impact it. So yeah, this is where I've always stood by it. It's where you don't have the data in front of you to really prove yourself, but I'm adamant that it has an impact.
It's frustrating to me because I believe that when you've got players constantly using the media themselves, by the way, to talk about we've got a player telling us to sign players, mate. This is a dual relationship. Okay, we both engage in this, and the only thing that I'll speak of, by the way, is not even football. Like, again, I do want to relate it back to us, and I do want to take a moment because for the most part, 90% of my interactions with this community has been so brilliant, and you guys have accepted me, who I'm aware I talk different. I'm not somebody that is from England, and it's a game that I love, and you accept me and my opinions and my impact on that, and it's not lost on me that I get to see that. But it is also very true that there are times when you say an opinion and you get absolutely swarmed, and I have to relate that to a footballer where, mate, we're minnows in comparison to
it's nothing, mate. It's not even comparable, isn't it? It's
no. And I have to be honest, mate, there are times when, I've had to remove myself from X because it affects me. It does affect me. I've gotten so upset at the comments, and I read everything because I take it to heart. Because why? Because I love this. I do. I love the game. I love it. And this is my point. These players love what they do. So are you telling me that they're not going to read any criticism, let alone from people they might want to consider as valid, which are ex-pros? Are you telling me that if you're in your job, okay, and your manager is talking at lunch, criticizing you, are you telling me you're not going to try to lean in and figure out, is that something that is really affecting you? If it's not your manager and it's a visiting manager and they come and they say, oh, I saw that George or that Rohan guy, he looks a little lazy, are you not going to want to sit there and listen to it? Is it not going to get you down? Are you not going to go home on the tram or wherever you're going to go home and say, crap, what the hell is he talking about? Who's another manager from another region coming and calling me lazy? Am I lazy? I'm not lazy. I know I'm not. But then you approach the next day and you're like, well, am I lazy in what I'm doing? It's on your mind and it changes your routine. It changes your outlook. So I just want us to maybe sometimes look at the human effect of footballers, and we do need to consider that. I do think the media plays a role, absolutely. We're going to do our best as a club to remove that, but it's absolutely something that we need to front face and kind of accept that it's a portion, it's part of the analysis. And I think as a team, a lot of people respond with, well, what do you do towards it? You ignore them, mate. But I think part of the problem is you can't ignore something that's in your face so much, and it's part of what you do. So it's about learning coping mechanisms for it. So I don't know how to help the players in that regard, but I do think that it's something that is getting worse. Personally, that's the one thing I'll say. Like, if I look 10, 15, 20 years ago, progressively, it has gotten worse, and our access to players has just gotten closer and closer as fans. So we need to have that self-reflection and being able to say, listen, what we say matters. And you know what, mate? I think that's something in society that isn't being said enough, personally, where our words have impact, and we are important. If we're important enough to feel like we can impact the world and change the world, then you got to think that your words do.
100%.
So all in all, that's a big waffle session to kind of circle back. I wanted to ask you one quick question, and then we're going to tie it off. Your outlook on the season right now. We've got 2 games left. A reason to draw positives and negatives from the Liverpool match, just in general. How are you approaching the end of the season? What would you like to see in order to set yourself up for the window? And I want us to keep things separate from the window. We will have podcasts. Don't worry, you viewers. We will have tons of transfer podcasts for you to digest. But what are you hoping to see in these next 2 games from the boys, from the manager and the club?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, we look at that Newcastle game. I actually believe it's very important that we go there and we look to win, especially with what Newcastle have done to us this season and just generally our record against Newcastle. Although last season we did play very well at the Emirates, the 4-1 win. But I want us to make a statement there. I'm looking at these 2 games against Liverpool and Newcastle. I wanted us to make a statement. And I thought we showed a side to us that we haven't consistently seen in terms of reacting to adversity and getting a result. And against Newcastle, I want to see, again, a really positive performance. And, there's a lot on this game. If Newcastle win, they're very likely to get second. So I want us to take it seriously. I'd like us to experiment a little bit, especially with Declan Rice looking, I don't know if he will play, but let's assume he's not playing. I really want to see the inclusion of Calafiori, and I really want to see Miles in the centre alongside of Gabriel Martinelli on the out wide. So, I certainly want to see something like that happen. And then the Southampton game, I can't believe they managed to get a point there against Man City, but you'd think that is a good opportunity to really try some new things and finish the season not going out with a whimper, finishing on a bit of a high, and us reflecting of, at least come the end, we didn't really down tools. We gave it our all post PSG, finished second, best of the rest, lots to learn, lots of turbulence, being frustrating, things we can improve on, things that haven't been in our control, and roll on the summer.
Yeah, so one of the big things that I'm going to look towards next season about fixing is this idea of cluster losses, but also mainly responding when things aren't in our favor. We're at a point where things aren't in our favor. I want performances, and it's about the principle of setting yourself up for the rest of the season. So it's not just ending the season strong, but it's like, okay, we have failed in our objectives, but let's not fail in our principles here, because there's far too many times that I look at our performance in April and May and we have failed on principles. Like, mate, like when you go back for some of those seasons, like the losses to Southampton and the Ramsdale goal that gets conceded there, that wasn't something that was, not in our control. That was a failure of our own principles, and the first half that I saw against Liverpool was a failure of our principles. And we responded brilliantly to show something that, we haven't shown enough of all season in the second half. So let's continue that. Let's continue that momentum, show things more. My big tactical thing is I would love to see an Ethan Nwaneri false 9 cameo to see what that looks like. I'm not looking at it against Newcastle and their brutes, but I am looking against Southampton as something to see at some point, maybe for the last 20 minutes. I'd love to see what that looks like in a different role. And I would like to see us in preseason start to experiment and start to hone in on complementary pods. That's going to be my newest thing leading in to the rest of the season. But guys, that leads us to the end of the pod. We hope you enjoyed that big waffle sesh. If you guys do like some of this content that we're going to be doing, absolutely hit the link down below to earn a 7-day free trial on Patreon, as well as YouTube memberships. And Rohan, what can they find if they do sign up for these lovely, lovely things?
Oh, you got so many things. Ad-free main pods, rewatches, scout, it's data pods, youth pods, TCP live. Goodness me. And
it is a lot more stuff and definitely exciting. More Rohan just hates being asked that question, I think. Fundamentally, it's like, just check it out. Just check it out.
Just check it out. We've got everything there. Everything is there. We've got Ben White on there. We've got Declan Rice. We've got everyone. We've got loads of interviews. Check it out.
We're going to be working on Rohan's ability to transition into the membership talk. That's going to be his homework moving forward, and mine's going to be getting a better Ethernet cable. So, guys, thank you so much for all of your help. We appreciate, as always, your support. And we will be looking forward to getting to you guys pods next week. We've got a ton coming up, so have a look out for that. Thank you, good sir.
Nice one, mate. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure indeed. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.